Hello, everyone. I am Chulu and I'm part of the ACA education team. And we are glad to have you on this very cold day in Cape Town. Very windy, very cold, very rainy, and yet they say it's spring. But we're here anyway. Thank you for joining us and for giving a minute for others to join. As I said, I am Kulu and I'm part of the ACA team. And today we are bringing you a workshop that will unpack the role of climate justice leadership in the global south, as this is like a very important topic. But before we go on and get into the business of the day, I see Michelle. Uh, as always, we co-piloting. And I also see Gabriel. Gabriel joined us today. So Michelle, you can introduce yourself, though you are a familiar face, and also Gabriel. Just say hi to everyone, and then we can start.
Definitely a super familiar face, but be that as it may, hi all. I'm Michelle, also part of the education team, and will, as you heard, be co-piloting today's workshop. I'm super excited, and I see some familiar faces. I see some new faces in the room. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait. We literally can't wait to get into it.
Thank you, Michelle. Gabes, do you want to say something? Just say hi. Sorry for
Hi
putting you on the
everybody.
spot.
Don't apologize. Hi everybody. I'm Gabriel from ACA, but today I am here to learn just as much as everyone else. And so I'm literally here because I've got to put my student glasses on and kind of just understand a little bit more. So looking forward to today's session. I'm here to learn. So please treat me as a student today. Teach me as one of the people wanting to understand the role of climate justice leadership in the global south.
Nice. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Michelle, I think you can stop sharing your screen so that I can share from my side. I usually like being in control of the slides when I'm the one
You and
presenting.
me both. You and me both. There you go.
Okay, there you go. Such a beautiful full gallery.
Amazing.
Okay. There we go. Let me just switch off my mic before that gets into the way of things. So as I said, that today our workshop is going to be about the role of climate justice and leadership in the global south. And this is like a very important topic for us to talk about because usually voices from the global south are not as typically amplified in the conversation about climate justice and environmental justice in the world. So this conversation really will unpack that and see some change leaders, who are leading out there and like amplifying voices of young people from the global south, but also from the global community as a whole. And as per usual, we have a disclaimer that the concepts that we are discussing here and the ideas that we are discussing here can always be workshopped on their own. So after the workshop, you can do some pretty extensive research on the topics or on the case studies that we'll be doing. We have a lot of those today. Like we have a really packed program and a very packed workshop today because there's so much that young people from Africa and from outside of Africa that they're doing. So we'll have like really a lot. So you can go up, look up the people, look up the different spaces of engagement, and look up the different cases that we're going to be discussing and all of that. So this is not the be all end all of the information. You are really just going to be getting a very small tidbit, a very small piece of the iceberg. So then you are going to have to go and unearth, most of that yourself, right? We are going to have a quick check-in in the chat as per usual because we are people and we have feelings and there's a lot that is just generally happening around us. So first you're going to say your name and where you are joining from, so your city or your country. And today we're going to do things a little bit different. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you are going to rate how you are feeling today and maybe say what's making you feel like that. And then say one thing that you're looking forward to in the workshop. So for example, I'm Chulu, I'm joining from Cape Town, South Africa, and I am feeling a bit of a 4 today. Because there's a lot that is happening in Cape Town, a lot of strong rainfall and floods that is going on. So we all have just been inside and just trying to keep safe and all of that. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about the work that leaders around the world and in Africa specifically are doing. We can have that before we can go into the rules of engagements. I will just try and look in the chat and see what people are saying. So Gabriel is from Cape Town, South Africa, and they're feeling like a 4 today because of the weather, and they're looking forward to seeing the links between leaders and our climate justice future. Maybe whilst we wait for people to type in, Michelle can share with us a bit of their check-in.
Cool. So I'm Michelle. We've seen me earlier, and I said in the chat that I was feeling a 3. I'll maybe start with one thing that I'm looking forward to in the workshop, and then coming back to why I feel a 3. I'm looking forward to learning and connecting with you all, because I do believe that the space, and as much as I'm a co-pilot, co-facilitator, I don't have all the answers, and neither does Chulu, neither do all of us at the ACA team. But one thing that we aim to do is create dialogue and find out how much more we can learn from people. So that's very exciting. Why I feel a 3 is also partly because of the weather, but also just because of everything that's happening in our country. Cape Town is having like really hectic winds and rain. And I saw earlier that Gauteng, there's been a weather alert also issued for all of Gauteng. They're going to be having heavy rain as well, which will result in a lot of flooding. That means so many people will be affected. So I'm a little bit low because of that. Yeah, and I think also just important to hold space for those who are affected by the floods and the winds and everything, the kind of weather that we're currently experiencing, and to just keep them in mind as we proceed through the workshop.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Like, really a lot is happening. I feel that 3 is warranted. Okay, so Sarah Aldonso is saying that they're from South Sudan and they're feeling like a 5. Chris is joining from Kenya and they're feeling like a 6 today because it's a Monday, and they're looking forward to see where we leaders have failed to fuel climate justice. Yeah, such a nice pun, fueling. And then Thomas is joining from Lusaka, Zambia. They're feeling a bit like a 5 because of the weather, but they're looking forward to learn more and networking with everyone in here. And then there is Ella from the US, but joining from Cape Town, and they're feeling like a 6 today, and they're looking forward to learning more from ACA because they're not really familiar with our work. We hope you really from here on, you're going to start getting familiar with more of our work and more of these workshops. And then Jamie Powers, pronouns he, him, joining from Albemarle County, feeling a solid 8. Apologies, not in a place to come off nudes, looking forward to getting a better grounding in climate injustice and what needs to happen in different communities. And then Sele joining from Cape Town, South Africa, they're feeling like a 7. They're loving the weather because they've missed it so much, and they're looking forward to sharing our unique voices. And then we have Puti joining from Johannesburg, South Africa, and they're feeling like a 5 and looking forward to learn more about the roles of that leaders assume. And then we have Vivian from Cape Town, and they're at 4 too because the weather is so hectic, and all the more reason for why it's important that we are having these kinds of discussions. You can continue going through the chat because everyone is just like going in at it, and I don't think we'll have like enough time to go through everyone's check-in, but I'm like really loving it. People are feeling an 8, feeling a 6 from Mexico City, and that is beautiful.
Can I just honorable mention to Melissa?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, that's just an honorable mention to Melissa, and then continue.
Okay. I'm not seeing Melissa though in the chat. But like, yeah, thank you for that honorable mention to Melissa. Yeah, and thank you everyone for checking in. It's really important that we not only hold space for everyone out there, but we also hold space in here for each other, because some people like are having some really good feelings. They're loving the weather where they are. Some people are not loving the weather, and we like seeing climate change and also climate injustices like unfold right in front of us. So it's also important that we hold space for each other in these discussions too, which is why it's important that we always have a check-in where we start, where we get each other's bearings in terms of where we are, so that we can always just practice being nice and, always being aware of each other's feelings, and all of that. And then next up, we have our rules of engagement. So it's important that we respect the space in turn of respecting each other. So please raise your hand if you have a question or a contribution. Also, please practice the rule of two. So that means allow two people to speak or contribute before you contribute again. So this is so that we don't hog the mic and all of that. I'm such a bad example to make, like say, for instance, I'm talking, I have to allow two other people to talk and all of that. So that is quite a weird example for me to make, since I am co-pilot with Michelle. But for instance, if you talk, allow other two people to make contributions before you can make another contribution again. And this is typically for our discussions too, because usually when we are having these types of workshop, we are basically going to unpack the information together, unpack the contents of the workshop together. And usually when there are questions while someone is talking, you can feel free to just pop your thoughts at that point in time in the chat. And then when there's a time for discussion, then you can feel free to raise your hand. You'll be recognized, and then you can unmute and then talk. But then before you raise your hand again in the same discussion, just allow for two people to speak first before you can raise your hand again. Also just tell me if you feel like I'm moving a little bit too fast, because I do that sometimes because I am quite a fast talker. So if you're finding it hard to follow because I'm moving a bit too fast, just let me know. Or if you're struggling to follow, because we typically use English in these spaces, but English is not the only language that we use. So feel free to use your home language, and we hope that there will be someone in the room who can be able to translate. And should push come to shove and you're not able to do that, we will try and consult Google Translate. But the hope is that we have someone who can translate, so that we can open that space where there is no language barrier and people are free to express themselves best as they can. And yeah, lastly, you still more than welcome to use the chat. If you can't unmute, for example, during discussions, you can drop your thoughts or your questions in the chat. Or if someone is talking, you can definitely drop your thoughts in the chat. Also, just a note, we are using English as a primary language of communication in this space, but it does not mean that English is the only language that we use. So you are free to use any other language, and we will just hope that there's someone who can help us with the translation. So feel free to speak in your home language, or like your first language, if you are struggling with English. But we're just using English just as a way of trying to be inclusive of everyone, but we understand that itself has limitations. Okay, cool. We can get right into it. Unless, Michelle, there's something that I'm forgetting and you want to add something. Michelle, do we still have you? Okay. I think I'm just gonna move so long because I think
you have me and my little sister. Can you please go? But
She
no, everything
learn.
is okay. She does, but she's got all kinds of stories, but that's okay. We can go ahead. You've covered most of, you've covered everything. We're in a good space to go.
Cool. Okay, cool. So like we said, we'll be discussing climate leadership in the global south. So we've decided to section this week's workshop into two parts. So the first part, we're going to speak about climate leadership and collaboration. And then the second part, we're going to look at global perspectives into like shining onto Africa, but also look at other things that are happening in the world surrounding climate leadership and collaboration. Right? So just to contextualize, we'll be unpacking the role of leaders from the different sectors and how these leaders can collaborate and partner up with each other to facilitate just transitions and advancing the struggle against climate change. So together in the workshop, we will then work through the role of leaders and how they can partner through people-centered collaborations and all of that, right? So let us begin. So firstly, before we move and start talking about all of these things, what do we mean by climate leadership? But to be specific, what do we mean by tangible climate leadership? And this is something that we all should really be collaboratively trying to define and to unpack, right? Especially when we want to speak of terms such as people-centered, right? So why is it important for us then to interrogate and redefine what climate leadership is, or rather what tangible climate leadership is? This is important in particular because it's in order for us to be able to hold our leaders accountable and make sure that they fulfill their leadership role, right, as our leaders, particularly leaders that are elected, because those are the people that are supposed to be protecting the interests of citizens or like the broader humanity, of wherever that they're leading from, right? So I'd like to think of leaders as people who are unlike bosses, because bosses are like, do this, do that, you work well under pressure, so do it like this, do it like that, right? Just barking orders. But as a leader, you are very collaborative and you are also like very amenable. You understand that you are not the end all and be all of information and of knowledge, right? So you're always open to learning more from your team or the people that you are leading, because at the end of the day, you're not leading yourself, but you are leading people. So it is very important that they understand the bottom top approach, so that solutions should come from the bottom, solutions should come from the people, so that they are people-driven solutions, and their leadership and their leadership style really as a leader is people-driven. So if, for example, we are having a problem with climate responses and that government, for example, in Kampala, Uganda, the mayor in that city maybe is not, and their mayoral committee, they're not responding to issues of climate change in an appropriate manner and in a way that centers people, right? So we should be able to then rise up to that challenge and be say, oh, but you're not doing this and doing this and doing this, in a way to hold them accountable and make sure that they fulfill their leadership role. But if they're coming from a point already where they're like, well, I am trying to exhibit tangible leadership and tangible climate leadership, they're going to understand that they need to consult the people, because at the end of the day, whatever decisions they make, whatever maybe say bylaws that are made are going to affect the people. So it is important then that the people understand what those laws are, and even those laws are inspired by the people, are inspired by wanting to keep the people safe, are inspired by just the general overall development of the people, whether that is climate and environmental development, or that is mental and psychological development, or it is economic development. It should always be driven by the people, and understanding that everything is a team effort, and you don't only work with your team as a leader in your office far away there, but that team effort also comes from consulting with the people and them offering those solutions, and then you seeing how you can implement those solutions. So they come in different ways and in different forms, and also in different levels. So before we move on, I just want us to have like a very quick popcorn discussion, 2 or 3 people or 5 maybe. And what we're really going to be speaking to is what are the other characteristics other than the ones that we noted in the previous slides, that are the traits or characteristics that tangible climate leadership has, or like people that we see that, yeah, they're exhibiting tangible climate leadership. This is a person that we would want to lead us in the struggle against climate change. So you can feel free to unmute yourself and just say what you think those other characteristics or traits may be.
Hello and good evening, everyone.
Yes, we can hear you. You can go on.
Brian, I think you muted yourself.
Brian, I think you're on mute. Brian. Okay, so whilst we give Brian a chance to unmute, someone else can go. So you can just unmute yourself. Did I also just now forget that I'm on mute? So I'm seeing Gabriel on the chat box saying that honest leadership. So that is like very important that we have leaders that are honest, because if you have leaders that are lying to people, it's going to be very hard to keep track of that, and it's also going to be very hard to hold them accountable because they're constantly lying. I think generally, even for themselves, that would be like very hard for them to keep up with their own lies. That means they never intend on really doing any change for good, you know. And then Thomas is saying, I think a leader who is ready to listen and cooperate. That is very important. A leader must always be ready to listen and also cooperate, because they must understand that they're not leading themselves, but they're leading people. So it is important that they listen to the people's needs and listen to what sort of solutions they want, so that they can cooperatively shape how those solutions look. Sele is saying tangible climate leadership should be facilitators of change and be willing to experience discomfort for the cause. I was very impressed by the protest last week by Unite Behind. So yeah, definitely leaders should always be ready, to be agents of change, to facilitate change, and never be scared of that. And also not be scared of being taken out of their comfort zones or their zones of privilege in order to fight for the cause, in order for them to advance, the struggle against climate change or any other, injustices, climate justice, social injustice, and all of that. And they must also be understanding and responsible leaders. Responsibility is one that's also like very important. Leaders who are committed to action. That is very important, because most of the time our leaders really have talk shops where they just want to talk and talk and talk about how they have these amazing solutions, but you never see any of those solutions implemented. There's no political will to implement those solutions. So it's also really important then to have leaders who are committed to action, who want to do something about the situation that they find themselves in and their constituencies find themselves in. What is important also is like a global mandate. Leaders often become tunnel vision around their countries. Oh, wait, I lost that for a second. Oh, oh, yeah. Okay. So that is also like very important, especially like around international relations, because there is always this idea that leaders want to cater for what's best for their countries, and they often hog resources, or they often hurt other countries, for lack of a better word, in that process. because they solely thinking for their country. So they should always have a global mandate that is just purely concerned about humanity. And then lastly, Felix is saying support for vulnerable communities. They must prioritize the needs of vulnerable and marginalized communities, ensuring that climate policies and initiatives benefit all members of society. Corporate responsibility. So climate leaders in the business world must implement sustainable practices within their companies, reduce emissions, and prioritize environmental and social responsibility. And then adaptation and mitigation. Very big words. So adapting to something basically is when something is happening, you're able to respond and survive and enjoy it. And that's basically you adapting. Mitigation is basically being able to prevent something. So they must balance efforts between climate adaptation, preparing for the impacts of climate change, and mitigation, reducing emissions, to create a comprehensive climate strategy. And then transparency and accountability. They must maintain transparency in their climate actions, report progress, and must be accountable to the public stakeholders for their commitments. And then lastly, have long-term vision. Climate leaders must prioritize long-term sustainability over short-term gains. That is really important because most of the time, especially when it comes to fossil fuels, a lot of particularly elected leaders will be like, if we open up this pipeline of like gas or this pipeline of oil, we're really going to benefit as a country because of the sort of money stimulus that's going to come in, but then forgetting really what fossil fuels do, and never thinking of like long-term sustainable strategies. So that's also really important. And that multi-generational challenge that climate change is, and just really thinking of that as a leader. So not only just thinking in front of you, but also thinking beyond what you're seeing now, beyond you being alive, thinking of the future generations, and all of that. So that was amazing. And that is like a really great segue into what we're going to be talking about next, which is the different forms that tangible leadership comes in. So we typically have elected leaders or government leaders, and these are leaders that mostly will deal with things around policy and policy framing and policy making. They will be dealing with regulations and laws and all of that, right? And this happens from a local level, so where you have your local municipalities, right? And you have your sort of mayoral, and then you have your provincial leadership or your state leadership, and then you have your whole country leadership. So you sort of have your president and their cabinet, and you have parliament, you have your lower house, upper house, or whatever, like that structure it may take, right? And that is the first form that tangible leadership can come in, through elected leaders in what we call typically traditional politics, right? And then you have community-based leaders or movement-based leaders or activists, right? And typically these leaders will work around advocacy, they will work around policy reform, and just generally holding people accountable. So you'll find that in most times it is community-based leaders or movement-based leaders that are the ones that are holding elected leaders or government leaders to account. They're also the ones that hold our next form of leaders, which is business leaders, right? And business leaders are typically, well, not even typically, they are in the private sector, running businesses and all of that. So what is tangible leadership in business leaders? They have people-centered business practices, so they think of how their business model and how their business policies affect people, whether they are morally good or morally wrong, and if they are morally wrong, where can they amend and make sure that they promote the health and well-being of the people that they are trying to provide a service to, or of the people where they working, for example, right? We have different companies in different places, and often businesses have to consider, even if the service that they are providing is not provided directly to the community, but they must make sure that they are having a business there benefits the community, and it is people-centered businesses. And it's important then that they care about the well-being of the community, they care about the progress and development of the communities. And when that comes to climate justice and climate change, then they have to make sure that they have climate friendly and environmentally friendly practices that are not endangering the environment and the people that occupy that environment, whether in the space that they're in or in other spaces that they operate. Because also often businesses will, in that one space where they feel that elected leadership or government leadership is quite strong in this one area, so our practices in this area are going to be good. But in another area where the government leaders or elected leadership is not as strong, then they're doing something that is the total opposite, that is not people-centered, that endangers people and all of that. And it's also important, particularly for business leaders, to make sure that they adhere to policies and regulations and go above and beyond to make sure that they adhere to those. And these would be policies that are set by the government, that are made by the government, and regulations and laws that are made by the government, or like even sort of international organizations or global organizations of governance or international relations. Right? So it's really important that they adhere to those policies and those regulations, and they go above and beyond to make sure that they are doing that, and they're not only just doing the bare minimum. So that's really important. But you must also take note that these sort of leaders and leaderships can happen in all kinds of levels. So you can have elected leaders or government leaders at a local level, at a national level, at a regional level, at a global level. You can also have community-based leaders or like movement-based leaders that are at a local level or national level or regional. So for example, ACA would be sort of your regional community-based leadership organization, right? Because it operates mainly in the African context or within the African continent, right? So that would be like a regional sort of organization. But an organization like, I think, Greenpeace, that would be a big global organization of community-based leaders or movement-based leaders that are operating internationally. And for business leaders also, that can happen in the same instance. So let's say, for example, Coca-Cola, you can have the Coca-Cola office in Nairobi, Kenya, and like that office is responsible for maybe whatever community social responsibility projects that they're doing in Kenya, right? So that would be sort of localized leadership. But then you also have a Coca-Cola Africa sort of office, and that would be regional leadership. But you also have the Coca-Cola conglomerate corporate company that operates multinationally over a lot of countries, if not all countries in the world, right? And so that would be at a global level. So all of these sort of leaderships can be experienced at a local, national, regional, and global level. And also the sort of impact then that they have can also be measured in terms of that. If you're a local organization, you're most likely to have impact in your state or in your province or in your town or your community. But if you are a national organization, you are most likely to be advocating around policy reform in your own country. But if you're a regional organization, you will then be doing work that speaks to the whole continent. And if you're a global organization, you'll be doing work that speaks to the whole globe, so to the whole of Earth, right? In terms of how our climate policies should be looking like, and all of that. I'm hoping that everyone is happy with that and they understood that. And then bringing it now back to this tangible climate leadership. Why is it important for us to understand that there are these sorts of leaderships, and these leaderships occur at these different levels? Why is it important for us to understand tangible climate leadership in that sense. It's important because these leaders in their different spheres and in their different levels, it is important for them for their orbits to sort of collapse into each other and collaborate and be in partnerships that are people-centered, that are for the good of the people, right? So how can these leaders work together and making sure that they're advancing the struggle against climate change? Climate policies is one of like the biggest things, right? It is important that when government is setting these climate policies, it is people-centered. And often it is movement-based organizations that will be pushing for that. So in a sense, then movement-based organizations would have to collaborate with government to say, well, we have the ear of the people and the people have our ear, and this is what people on the ground are saying. And so it is important then that elected leadership then uses that sort of data that they're getting from that and implement these different climate policies. But also policies are useless if they are not going to be implemented and followed, because then these policies often speak to businesses, right? So it is also important then for businesses to come to the table and say, we are going to fully adhere and go above and beyond to make sure that these policies and these regulations and these laws are followed, right? And this is also important in developing sustainable systems generally now as a people and as humanity, because it needs the work of all of these different sectors to collaborate, because it is pointless when as movement-based organizations and leaders we're saying, well, this is what is going on. People are experiencing this on the ground. In fact, people are saying it through these movements, because movement-based means the people, right? So people are saying we are experiencing this, right? It is then important for government to take that and legitimize that by implementing it. And we see it reflected in the systems of society, that if we're saying a company cannot be plundering and extorting our environment like this, then we see results happening. When should they do that, they are held to account, punishments attended, and all of that. And this is all in an effort to develop sustainable systems. And it's also important for businesses to collaborate, because they are one of the biggest contributors to climate change. So it's important that then they come and also collaborate and partner in making sure that there is adaptation and mitigation, so that we also develop sustainable systems. And then second, lastly, just generally tendering climate justice. All of this, these responses and all of this help and all of the refuge that has to be offered to people, for example, when there's an instance of floods, needs money, right? So it is important that all of these people collaborate together to make sure that climate justice is tended without fear or favor, right? And there is equity in doing that. So that now conversation about intersectional justice and making sure that we are understanding the way that your identities overlap and intersect, and how that affects you and how that must affect the way that we respond to that. And then lastly, it is also just generally important that they collaborate in order for them to cure the existing problems, and also work on sustainable prevention strategies. So yeah, that is the importance of climate leadership. We can have another quick Q&A discussion for about 2 minutes, because we'll also have like a bigger discussion towards the end where all of these ideas now come together and they show you the bigger picture that we had in mind when putting together this this workshop. But just to give me a break, because I've been talking quite a bit much, we have 2 minutes just to put in some questions, pose some questions. We have questions or any comments about tangible climate leaderships and partnerships and collaborations between these different sectors. You can go ahead and drop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself.
Dominic,
and we have about 2 minutes to do that.
Dominic,
Pardon?
in the chat question.
Let me just check the chat quickly.
I think Dominic can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you.
Is that Dominic? I think that's Brian. Brian, can you hang on? Dominic, are you with us? Dominic, please feel free to ask your question. Maybe while we wait for Dominic, there's a contribution in the chat from Victor.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dominic.
Good. Oh, thank you. I was around. My network was the issue, so I just want to at least to go on with the discussion about the. So I was thinking about the issue of the climate. Climate is a very big factor for us to engage in. At least you can bring more ideas so that at least you can, at least from where we are or where we sit, from Namibia, from Zambia, at least you can encourage the climate change, the climate action, so that we can give each and everyone space to at least discuss and enjoy what they want to say. Thank you.
Michelle, are you seeing any other hands for me? Because I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see anything.
No, not at the moment. I know Brian had his hand up. So maybe we can come to you, Brian. And if anyone else has a contribution, I do see contributions in the chat. But if you should want to unmute your mic, please feel free to do so. In the meantime, I think I'll go to the chat. Victor says, advancing climate change requires global cooperation and collaboration among leaders from various sectors. Here are some ways in which leaders can work together to address climate change. One is international agreements. Leaders can collaborate through international agreements such as the Paris Agreement, which provides a framework for countries to work together to limit global warming. They can engage in negotiations, set emission reduction targets, and share best practices. Second is knowledge sharing. Leaders can foster knowledge sharing by exchanging information, research, and technological advancements related to climate change. This can be done through conferences and workshops and collaborative research projects, allowing leaders to learn from each other and each other's experiences and solutions. Third is policy coordination. Leaders can coordinate their policies and regulations to create a conducive environment for climate action. This can involve aligning emissions reduction. This can involve aligning emission reduction targets, implementing carbon pricing mechanisms, and support. And then Joshua says, the reaction of leaders to climate change and the policies they implement can vary significantly depending on their political ideologies, priorities, and the specific circumstances of their countries. Recognition of the issue. Many world leaders have acknowledged the reality of climate change and its potential impacts on the environment and economies. And then Sally says, we have various structures in place, and I appreciate the reminder to engage with the existing policies. Amazing. Thank you so much for all of those contributions in the chat. Beverly, I see your hand. You can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, I'm Bev from Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm a sustainability consultant with an international global company. I just wanted to put a comment in about education. And what we're finding is a lack of education within the private as well as government sectors of understanding, going around circular economy. So people don't actually understand how to save the planet. We keep telling them we need to save planets, but we don't actually give them ways to do it. So a global mandate, we were joking about this global mandate, but it needs to start actually in schools where children are taken into, dustbins and shown how to basically separate the trash. So that was what I was just trying to get to, is that we're saying save the planet, but we're not giving people solutions. And government also needs to put this into play. Plastic is one of the big ones that nobody's really talking about. And these different sectors also need to have taxes come in, where we don't see made locally that often anymore. And we need to ask ourselves why. So yeah, sorry, my 5 cents.
That's okay. Great. Okay, so my chat is back up. I can see David asking, how can we ensure that leaders are held accountable for their commitments to address climate change? What mechanisms exist to enforce climate-related agreements? That is like a really nice segue to our part 2, which is perspectives from around the world. So in this part, we'll be doing sort of a case study on different ways that leaders have been held accountable, but also just looking at leaders who are out there doing it themselves. We are one of those leaders, us in this chat and in this seminar, in this workshop right now, is us doing it for ourselves. Knowledge sharing is a very big part of it. Okay, so I want to introduce us to 2 leading climate leaders, namely Vanessa Nakate from Uganda and Elizabeth Watuti from Kenya. Right, so who is Vanessa Nakate? Vanessa Nakate is a 26-year-old climate justice activist that is based in Uganda and was basically the first climate striker in Uganda, basically. So was one of the first people to lead a protest, protesting around climate change and all of that in Uganda. They also have a book out called The Bigger Picture, My Fight to Bring a New African Voice to the Climate Crisis. So most of Vanessa's work, as the name of the book suggests, is around amplifying the African voice, particularly the voice of young Africans around the climate crisis and the impact that we are facing, though we like one of the least contributors to climate change, but we are one of the most adversely impacted with climate change. So her work is really around all of that, amplifying the voice of young people in Africa around climate change, and also just generally conscientizing and raising awareness around climate change for young people and making us realize that climate change is really an immediate struggle. It is something that is happening now and something that we have to face right now. So it's important that we start taking action and our voices are like out there and we heard. And basically fight to bring Africa's fight against climate change to the world stage. Because we may have these conversations on the side and all of this knowledge sharing, but very little of it often gets out to the world stage. I was thinking about this earlier on when I was like looking at the news, in particular with what is happening with the floods in Cape Town. And you're seeing like with a lot of these affluent areas, there's like rolling reports in terms of, this is flooded, the bridge was washed away and all of that. And like, it freaks you out. But also at the same time, having family members and friends that stay in the Cape Flats and townships, and knowing that their houses are flooded, they have nowhere to sleep, tonight. And none of that is in the news. So that is like the exact same sort of predicament that Africa finds itself in, that a lot more attention is paid to the global north. So to your typically richer countries that plundered us, and very little attention and engagement is brought to Africa's fight against climate change. And so Vanessa's work is really trying to bring Africa's fight against climate change to the world stage and saying we are one of the least contributors, but we are mostly adversely impacted. And it is important that we talk about that. And when we think solutions, we start thinking solutions that also speak to Africa and speak to dealing with the kinds of challenges that we faced with because of climate change. And also recognizing that those challenges that we faced with of climate change are not of our own doing most of the time. And so it is important that then the global north also takes responsibility, so Vanessa does a lot of work around that and is one of the change makers and change leaders that we're looking at today. Like I said at the beginning of the workshop, that obviously the people that we introduce here and the case studies that we introduce here, you can go and research about them and read up more on them. This is just like a teaser for you to let you know that there's such a person who is doing this great work, and you have to go check that out and learn more about that person. So please check Vanessa out and check out her work. Very beautiful stuff. Also very powerful stuff, particularly coming from Uganda, a country that gets stricken on extreme polar opposite ends, with extreme droughts, and also gets affected with extreme floods and mudslides at the same time. So imagine then the sort of experiences that are coming, from her work, and how those are informed by real life experiences of what it is to live in a supposedly third world country and experience all of these things when knowing that, well, it is not really your doing. You're contributing the least, like you're contributing the least to your pain and your suffering. So very important work there. Please do check it out and read up more. And if you're able to, you can even get the book. I'm pretty sure it is amazing. And then up next, we have Elizabeth Watuti, who is 28 years old and is based in Kenya. And they're an environmental and climate activist, and they're founder of Green Generation Initiative. So basically going around planting fruit trees, because that we know that deforestation is a very big issue in South Africa. And Elizabeth, not South Africa, in Africa, sorry for that. And Elizabeth's work is mainly around that. So reforestation rather than, to counter the problem of deforestation and all of that. So started the organization. I think she was about like 20, 21 years old when she started the organization. And to this day, they have planted over 30,000 fruit trees. And we know the importance of trees, basically in making sure that soil is arable and it's held together. With trees, things such as mudslides are less likely to happen because the soil is held together by the roots of the tree and all of that. Land can remain arable for a very long time because of the nutrients that the tree is taking in, and also the other nutrients that the tree is secreting and all of that. So yeah, doing like a lot of work around deforestation and making sure we save our forests, and also recognize the fact that forests are one of the biggest counter mitigators of global warming, because their intake of the carbon dioxide that is produced by fossil fuels and these unsustainable ways of energy, it is the trees that take back in that carbon dioxide and give us the oxygen we so really need to live. So yeah, together, Vanessa, Elizabeth is one of the 3 young Africans fighting to save the world. And the second one of those 3 young Africans is Vanessa. I will leave the third one to you. And maybe at the next workshop, I can ask you, bah, who was that third one? Just to make sure that you actually go out there and do more after these conversations and do more research and start, unpacking some of the things that we go through in these workshops. So that might be homework, wink, wink. And then still in leading climate leaders, we have the cancel coal court case. And this one is like a lot closer to home. It is actually home because it is a court case that is led by the African Climate Alliance alongside with 2 other partner organizations. And it is also basically the first youth-led court case in South Africa. And basically the plea of the cancel coal court case is a more sustainable and just future now, not tomorrow, not a year after, not a decade after, not a century after, right now, because we need sustainable ways of providing energy, of getting energy. And that directly contributes to our just futures. And that work must start now. So the basis of the case, it basically challenges the inclusion of 1,500 megawatts. Megawatts is like 1,000,000 watts, So it challenges the inclusion of 1,500 megawatts of new coal in South Africa's integrated resources plan. And basically in court, the 3 organizations are represented by the Center for Environmental Rights. Right. The case, which is against the Minister of Energy Resources, Gwede Mantashe, challenges the inclusion of this 1,500 megawatts of new coal in South Africa and its integrated resources plan. This case is particularly important because we know how coal mining and coal burning and generally the burning of other fossil fuels contributes greatly to global warming and climate change. So this is actually a very important case in the continent of Africa. And also like just generally thinking now, like when I think of this coal generation, coal mining and energy generation from coal, and you think of experiences of people that stay in communities like Emalahleni, which means a cold place, literally direct translation, in Mpumalanga, which is the province where most of this coal mining happens, the sicknesses that come with that. So now we're talking in terms of the things that people may say that they feel in an immediate sense, as opposed to saying maybe the globe is warming up, and that the climate is slowly changing and we're seeing extreme weather patterns, right? But like just generally living in an area where the air is so thick and dark because you live so close to a coal mine or you live so close to a coal processing center. So it's like a very important case because it does not only deal with the environmental sort of consequences of coal mining and adding such a very big investment into coal, a whole 1,500 megawatts of energy generation capacity, but it also speaks to the experience that people are having to live next to these places, having your lungs shot at a very young age because you're constantly inhaling this thing and all of that. So the case continued on the 25th of November, the initial legal victory. So this is 25th of November, 2022. The initial legal victory took place when Judge Mitchelle of the Pretoria High Court ordered the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy to release records relating to the minister's decision to include new coal power in the 2019 integrated resource plan for electricity and the 2020 ministerial determination for new coal issued under the RIP. So here, basically, the court is basically saying that release the records relating to whatever decision you made to include this new coal power and, in the years of 2029 to 2020, and determination why you need to use this coal and all of that, especially under the integrated resource plan for electricity, because also South Africa currently is suffering a lot with load shedding. So I'm pretty sure like one of the things that they said was, we're trying to deal with the load shedding problem, you know, but it was to justify why do you need this. So the judge saying release these records is also one of the ways then that is allowing and speaking to the question about accountability and how we can start holding accountable. If we have a policy that says, you know, do this and do that, how do we hold you accountable? If we have a constitution that says I have a right to a safe, clean environment and you're endangering that environment, I must see records that say you actually have been trying not to endanger my environment, or you have been purposefully endangering my environment, and how can I hold you accountable for that? So this was such a very huge step towards, you know, the sort of steps that are to come in the overall victory of the case, you know. So just having that little bit of leverage now of saying we want to hold you accountable, the court has now specifically instructed you to release these records and you need to do that, right? And so the court had ordered the minister to release these documents in question within 10 days and ordered government to pay costs, clearing the way for the main #cancel coal case to proceed. So you can read up more on this case on the African Climate Alliance.org organization website. So you can just check it out and read more on it. There's also quite a bit of news coverage around it, so you can go and read up more on that and how this is sort of paving new pathways for climate litigation in Africa, and how that is important in making sure that we are holding our leaders accountable. And then moving right on to another case, which happened in the USA, in Montana. So the Montana climate case, basically, its plight was around the idea, or not even an idea, this is in their constitution, this is in the Montana constitution, the right to a clean and healthful environment, right? So the basis of the case was that state officials were violating the constitutional rights of Montanians, so people from Montana, by promoting fossil fuels. So this also speaks to the big problem of fossil fuels, right? And so when this case was tabled in front of the judge, it was basically an organization of young people saying, we feel as though state officials are violating our constitutional right to a clean and safe and healthful environment by them promoting fossil fuels. And this case actually has come to an end, and there has been a ruling by Judge Kathy Seeley, and basically saying that they, as the court, are affirming the organization's claim that a stable environment is included in a right to a clean and healthful environment, and it is guaranteed in the state's constitution. So there's always these sort of arguments when we say, but I have a right to a clean environment, I have a right to a healthy environment where I'm able to thrive, right? And then there will always be like these sort of loopholes that government officials will try and go through because they're like, well, nothing in the constitution really says that, and all of that, right? But I mean, come on, you pumping all of this carbon dioxide into our atmosphere by burning fossil fuels and promoting fossil fuels to be burned so that they can pump all of this carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. You are directly infringing my right to a clean and healthy environment. So this was like a really important case also, just like the cancel coal case that is still ongoing. It is a very important case in terms of legitimizing the fact that a clean and healthy environment also includes, quite literally, our environment. It includes our atmosphere and how we feed in that. It does not only speak to physical danger of not wanting to get mugged or of not wanting to be stabbed and all of that, right? It also speaks directly to the environment that you're in and how clean and how healthy it is, and whether it allows you as a person to thrive, and whether it gives you dignity also as a person. The judge also said that the provision in Montana's Environmental Policy Act, which prohibited the state from considering climate impacts when permitting energy projects, is unconstitutional. So there is like this environmental policy sort of act. So it is a law, it is a piece of legislation which prohibited, so it sort of stopped the state from considering what climate impact could a certain energy project have when we permit it to go on, right? So the judge went on to say then this policy allowing you to do that, allowing you to not have to consider the climate impact of these energy projects is unconstitutional because it directly infringes on the right to a clean and healthful environment. So what is the significance of climate court cases in advancing climate activism? And I just want to pinpoint the fact that we had just spoken about how do we go on to hold accountable governments at a local level, at a national level? How do we hold states and governments at a regional level and at a global level accountable when they go and sign on an international relations policy and say, well, we accept that as South Africa, we are bound by this piece of international law, or as Kenya, we are bound by this piece of international law. How do we then go about holding such countries accountable, or such leaders accountable? So one of those ways is through court cases, right? It is through using existing systems that are put there to hold people accountable, though they are still pretty inaccessible to a lot of people because they require a lot of money and they require a lot of time and a lot of energy, which is something a lot of people don't have, right? So to a great extent, they're still very exclusive, right? And it is important that we start opening those up. But at least we're starting to see that with climate court cases and what is their significance in holding people accountable. So it definitely changes the climate litigation sort of landscape, because in a sense, the science behind climate change is basically put on the stand, and it is seen prevail, as in the case with the Montana court case, where we saw the science behind climate change when we have been saying that climate change is happening. It's not going to happen in 50 years. It's happening right now, and we need to deal with it right now. We need to start living sustainably, and businesses need to start doing business sustainably. I mean, capitalism is a problem for another day, but in this case, we're still like, well, do your business, but do it in a way that is sustainable and in a way that cares about people's health and their environment and their dignity and their right to have that dignity and the environment right. So we're seeing that being challenged in the court of law, and we see that science rising to the occasion and coming out at the top, where we're like, actually, the science is valid. Climate change is happening, and so we need to sit up and pay attention. It is important that we start responding to climate change in ways that are sustainable. We need to start mitigating. We need to put in action and in plan ways to mitigate further deterioration of the planet. So these court cases sort of have opened up and completely blew it at the top with climate litigation, and it changes that landscape completely, because now it is an example that you are able to bring such cases to the fore, and there is hope that you will be heard and you may even win, right? And secondly, you're also seeing the science sort of aligning with the law, so in a way, that science coming out at the top and the judge saying, because remember, another way that laws are formed other than people sitting in the legislature, which would be your parliament or any form of like your lower house or higher house, other than laws being set through the legislature, they are set through precedents. So what precedents is basically, let me use South Africa as an example because I'm quite familiar with the law in South Africa. So what happens is that you have certain courts that are high courts who are able to say, well, I'm making this ruling. It is, for example, unconstitutional for you to invest in that amount of coal, knowing exactly what it is going to do, right? So what that does, if that is said in a high court, what that does, it means for any other case that comes before the law that has the same merits, it will then take precedence from that previous case that had judged in its favor or not in its favor if you are the person being fought in this case, right? So it sort of sets laws into motion where you start having a library and an archive of legal precedents that basically supports the science and that aligns with the science and bring it together to say this makes sense and people are getting hurt, and our role as the law is to tender justice. So that is where you also start seeing the justice system beginning to see climate justice as a form of justice that they also should adopt, right? And so in turn, this also legitimizes the plight of climate activists through court proceedings and judgments, because then these remain in precedent, and it legitimizes because now it goes through a legitimate already existing system. So it gives it legitimacy then to say, if I was recognized by the Constitutional Court of South Africa, or if I was recognized and I was vindicated by the Supreme Court of the United States of America, then definitely this plight that I have as a climate activist or as a climate leader is definitely legitimate because I have been given legitimacy by a system that is already existing and has been considered to be legitimate by a lot of people, right? So that is also one of the ways that we can start harnessing the systems around us, though they may be still very inaccessible and quite exclusive, but slowly trying to open those up. And then lastly, it opens room for ways to hold elected leaders and businesses accountable. This is particularly important because then you are able to take, excuse me, you are able to take a British Petroleum or a Shell for wanting to blast into our ocean, right? So you're able to do that. So it really opens room to hold elected leaders and business leaders accountable. And moving swiftly along, this now speaks to the Africa Youth Voices sort of seminars we've been. Could you please unmute? I'm hearing someone talk.
Mid volume.
Elvis, could you please unmute? Mute, sorry. Could you please mute yourself? I could hear you talking there. This speaks directly to the Africa Youth Voices speaking to COP28. Which is basically the conference of the parties. And this is now the world stage that we're being brought into. And I'm quickly going to run through this because I know that ACA has been having sort of dialogues and conversations around this. And I think the very last one is coming up. If it has not just happened, I think it's coming up because I was in the third one. So the last fourth one is happening that is particularly speaking to COP28. But basically, what is the Conference of the Parties by the United Nations Climate Change? Oh my God. So who are these parties that are involved, right? There's about 198 parties, which include all member states of the United Nations. And basically the purpose and the aim of the Conference of the Parties is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that would prevent dangerous human-induced interference with the climate system. So someone in the chat had also already started this, talking about the Paris Agreement? I forgot what it's called. But yeah, so someone had already started this conversation. So definitely look up on our YouTube channel some of the Africa Youth Voices conversations leading up to COP28, and what it is basically about. And this is just to introduce you to the fact that we also have a sort of organization, in a sense, that brings together these 198 parties, which are member states from all over the world that form part of the UN. And this is one of the platforms that are really important, one of the biggest platforms in the world, where you can raise up demands and issues surrounding climate change, and hopefully you will be given an ear. But this is a platform that is really important for an activist or for a climate leader to know. Right. And we made a little note at the bottom that human-induced interference basically refers to all human activities that are impacting on the climate system and the environment. So human-induced interference just basically speaks to what we are doing as humans. But also note that that does not only speak to like an individual human, so like a natural human, that also speaks to corporate humans, so businesses and corporations and all of that. Just noting time, because I have like literally 30 seconds to get through this last slide. So basically, what is the significance of advocacy around conferences like the Conference of the Parties? And this is the 28th one that we basically leading up to. This is where decision makers and state leaders meet. So it's really a prime opportunity for people to have their voices heard. So this is like one of the biggest opportunities you'll ever get, prime opportunity as an activist, as a movement, whether national, local, global, for you to be heard. It's like the prime opportunity for you to be able to speak out and be heard on a bigger platform, where you really feel like if things were to be adopted on that platform, there would be some sort of enforcement. So that is one of the biggest significant things around on the advocacy around COP28. And also speaking to international relations, policies and international agreements happen in such spaces. And this is now opportunity to also hold multinational businesses and governments accountable to the agreements that they form part of. Right. And also it is once again a prime spot for a movement and for a people, for leaders to make people-centered demands, climate justice-centered demands, intersectional justice-centered demands. It's like a prime opportunity for you to be able to bring to that, because it is such a great platform, and you best bet that it will resonate with other organizations that are there. It is also like a nice space to build solidarities. I'm like feeling so sad that I had to go through this part really quick, but we are pinched for time. And then just lastly, to conclude, we today unpacked and tried to understand the role that leaders generally play and how they can show traits of tangible climate leadership by trying to redefine and re-understand that together. And also in understanding the role the government, business leaders, and community leaders can play, we become better equipped in shaping our approaches and shaping our demands and holding leaders accountable. When we start knowing about these platforms and these opportunities and ways to legitimize our struggle, we are better equipped and better placed to start shaping our approaches and holding people accountable and holding businesses accountable that need to be held accountable. So this was basically what this workshop was aimed for, to have us understand the different facets of climate leadership and how we can maximize our impact as climate leaders in the different spaces that we're in the different countries that we're in, and with the different experiences that are not so different that we're having, and how we can come together and maximize our impact by using the spaces that we already have, and by making sure that they are disseminated and they are known far and wide, so that we're able to exert whatever sort of pressure that we need, and we're able to get our demands out there, and so that the fight for climate justice continues, and it is advanced, and it is taken seriously, and it is known that it has to happen now. We have to start building our sustainable futures now, not tomorrow, not in the next decade or in the next century. Right now, it needs to happen. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing for a moment, and maybe we can give way for 5 minutes of a quick discussion, maybe some thoughts, some comments, and then we can close, because this was quite a packed workshop, and with a lot of information, so there might have been a bit of an information overload, and people just need to process that, but also just because we are pressed for time. It is quite late, and people may need to grab their dinner and all of that. So feel free just to unmute yourself, or like just raise your hand and I'll note you, and then you can unmute, and then you can talk.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope we can connect in the future. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Malon. This is a very, very, all I can say it was a very insightful workshop, and thank you very much, guys, for organizing this wonderful workshop. I think we should try to collaborate, probably trying to have a physical 1 or 2 days conference that we can organize, guys. That was very, very exceptional. I did learn a lot. I think in future I'm going to organize some physical events and just to invite us and have more insightful about climate justice and climate change. And climate change is continuing to affect youth in Africa. Thank you very much, guys. Malum Rons from Zimbabwe.
Okay, great. If there's no other insight, I think that may be it for today. We had quite a very packed workshop. Though it was wonderful, but it was very packed, and people may need to take that in before we meet again on Wednesday for our dialogue with our experts, and we can talk more about these concepts to just try to unpack. So just a bit of housekeeping before we can all log off. Please check the data reimbursement form on the chat box so that you are reimbursed for your data. So please do that. And unfortunately today, we are unable to have a checkout because of the very rich conversation that we just had in the very long workshop. So just quickly click on your data reimbursement form, and then after that you can log out, and hopefully we will see you on Wednesday. Thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, see you on Wednesday.
Before we close, just wanting to say that if you missed the message in the chat, if you have any questions that you would like for us to address, send them to education@africanclimatealliance.org. We will address all of that. And yeah, I think that's the only other thing. And then make sure to sign up for the dialogue. A discussion is going to be incredible. I can tell you now. So yeah, otherwise, thank you all for joining us today.